They labeled her irrational when she left a high-paying job, deserted her urban apartment, and vanished for 3 months. Her friends were puzzled. Her family worried. Yet, in those silent months, something extraordinary occurred. She uncovered what truly mattered to her, what she genuinely valued, not what she was expected to value, not what society had taught her to chase, but what stirred true emotion deep within her soul. Carl Jung would have nodded in understandings. Swiss psychiatrist who transformed our grasp of the unconscious mind recognized a deep truth that many overlook. Sometimes, stepping away is the only way to uncover what you truly feel. In the absence of something or someone, the unconscious mind reveals what conscious thought hides. We live in a world fixated on gaining more followers, more wealth, more status, more recognition. But Jung understood that the most profound insights come not from what we gain, but from what we lose or choose to let go. When we walk away, we finally see what holds genuine emotional significance versus what we've merely been conditioned to value. This fascinating psychological phenomenon applies to everything from our careers to our closest relationships. Those who master this understanding gain access to a form of emotional intelligence that most people will never develop. Jung called this process enantiodromia, the emergence of the unconscious opposite, and it might be the most powerful psychological lever you've never learned to use. Modern psychology has spent decades studying what happens in the brain when we lose something, but Jung saw this much earlier than brain imaging technology could confirm it. The pain or relief we feel when something is taken away provides clearer information about our true feelings than all our conscious deliberations combined. Think about the smartphone in your pocket. How do you know if you're genuinely attached to it or simply habituated to it? The answer isn't found in how much you use it, but in what happens when it's gone. People who lose their phones report emotions ranging from mild annoyance to severe anxiety, verging on panic. That visceral reaction is the unconscious mind's verdict, a judgment far more reliable than any questionnaire about phone usage. Jung recognized that the unconscious doesn't rationalize or intellectualize. It doesn't care about what you're supposed to feel or what makes logical sense. It simply responds, and in that raw response lies the truth that the conscious mind often works overtime to conceal. Consider the relationship that ends. One person says all the right things about moving on and being fine, while another openly acknowledges their pain. Months later, it's often the person who acknowledged their attachment who has genuinely moved forward, while the one who insisted they were fine remains subtly stuck, their behavior betraying the attachment they denied. This is because the unconscious processes grief differently than the conscious mind. When we intellectually deny an attachment, the unconscious continues to process it through dreams, emotional outbursts, and patterns of behavior that seem disconnected from their source. Jung observed that acknowledging loss consciously allows integration between conscious and unconscious responses, while denial creates a split that manifests in psychological symptoms. The most fascinating application of this principle comes in major life choices. Many people agonize over decisions, creating pros and cons lists that become increasingly complex without producing clarity. Jung would suggest a simpler approach. Create temporary distance and observe what emerges in the absence. Considering leaving a job? Take a 2-week vacation with minimal contact and notice what arises. Relief or longing? Questioning a relationship? A brief separation often reveals feelings that proximity obscures. The unconscious speaks most clearly through the emotions that emerge in absence, not the thoughts we generate in presence. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the disowned aspects of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge. But he also understood that our attachments have shadows, emotional dimensions that remain hidden until the attachment is threatened or broken. When we walk away from anything, a person, a job, a city, a belief system, we activate what Jung would call the shadow of attachment. This shadow contains the unconscious emotional investments we've made without full awareness. Most people never discover the shadow of their attachments because they never create sufficient distance to see it. They remain immersed in relationships, careers, and belief systems, sensing discomfort but unable to identify its source. The person who walks away gains perspective that the person who stays can never access. This explains why major life transitions often bring unexpected emotional responses. The executive who retires and falls into depression isn't reacting to retirement itself, but to the unexpected revelation of how much identity was invested in professional status. The person who ends a relationship and feels not relief but emptiness is discovering how much of their sense of self was externalized in the relationship dynamic. Jung observed that these revelations rarely occur through intellectual analysis. You can spend years in therapy discussing your relationship with your career, but the truth emerges most clearly in the weeks after you quit. You can analyze your relationship patterns indefinitely, but walking away from a specific relationship reveals emotional attachments that no amount of analysis could uncover. The shadow of attachment explains seemingly irrational behavior following separation. The person who claimed to want freedom suddenly struggles with it when obtained. The individual who fought for independence finds themselves recreating dependency in new contexts. These apparent contradictions reveal the shadow operating, the unconscious attachment revealing itself only after the conscious connection is severed. What makes this psychological mechanism so powerful is its ability to cut through self-deception. We are masters at telling ourselves stories about what we want and why we want it. The unconscious has no such capacity for narrative. It simply responds, and in that response lies information untainted by rationalization. Jung was both a rigorous theorist and a practical clinician. He didn't just develop abstract concepts. He created psychological experiments his patients could use to access deeper self-knowledge. One such experiment involves deliberate temporary separation as a tool for psychological insight. The experiment is simple but profound. Create intentional distance from something you're attached to and observe with unflinching honesty what emerges in the space created. This isn't about permanently walking away, but about creating sufficient distance for unconscious feelings to surface. What makes this approach different from simply taking a break is the quality of attention brought to the separation. Jung would instruct patients to notice dreams, emotional fluctuations, and spontaneous thoughts during periods of separation. These psychological data points reveal what logical analysis cannot. Consider someone questioning their relationship with social media. The conventional approach involves analyzing usage patterns or reflecting on how it makes them feel. The Jungian experiment would be different. Delete all social media apps for 2 weeks, keep a journal of emotional responses, dreams, and spontaneous thoughts, and look for patterns that reveal the true nature of the attachment. The experiment works because it bypasses the rational mind's ability to justify and defend existing attachments. When something is present, we develop complex rationalizations for why we need it. When it's absent, the unconscious response provides clearer data. Jung applied this approach to everything from relationships to belief systems. He observed that religious doubts were often impossible to resolve through theological debate, but clarified immediately when someone stopped religious practices for a period. The emotional response to the absence of ritual revealed the true nature of faith more clearly than any intellectual consideration. The same principle applies to career questions, relationship dilemmas, and lifestyle choices. creating temporary. Distance doesn't just provide perspective. It activates unconscious processes that deliver information unavailable to conscious analysis. What makes this approach particularly valuable is its effectiveness in situations where logical analysis fails. When decisions involve complex emotional investments, pros and cons lists become exercises in rationalization rather than clarification. The Jungian experiment cuts through this complexity by focusing on the raw data of emotional response. Modern society treats loss primarily as something to be avoided. Jung saw loss differently, as a revelatory force that brings essential psychological information. The things we lose or walk away from teach us more about ourselves than the things we acquire. This perspective transforms how we view endings. Rather than seeing them solely as failures or tragedies, Jung recognized them as revelatory moments that disclose psychological truths otherwise inaccessible. The person who never ends anything, a job, a relationship, a living situation, misses crucial opportunities for self-knowledge. Perhaps the most profound application of this principle appears in Jung's approach to midlife transitions. He observed that at midlife, many people experience a crisis not because something is wrong, but because the unconscious mind begins revealing the costs of attachments formed in the first half of life. The career that provided status now feels empty. The marriage that offered stability now feels confining. These midlife revelations represent the unconscious mind's verdict on choices made primarily to conform to social expectations rather than authentic desires. The crisis occurs because the unconscious no longer accepts the rationalizations that sustained these choices for decades. Jung's revolutionary insight was that these crises aren't failures, but opportunities for psychological integration. Chances to align conscious choices with unconscious needs. The person who responds by doubling down on existing attachments misses the opportunity that walking away might provide. This doesn't mean Jung advocated abandoning responsibilities capriciously, but he did recognize that sometimes walking away from what no longer serves authentic development is necessary for psychological health. The wisdom lies in distinguishing between escaping difficulties and responding to genuine psychological signals that a chapter has reached its natural conclusion. The most successful transitions occur when people recognize that walking away isn't about rejecting the past, but about honoring what it has revealed. The executive who leaves a successful career isn't repudiating achievement, but acknowledging that the unconscious desires something different for the next phase of life. The person ending a relationship isn't declaring it worthless, but recognizing that its purpose in their psychological development has been fulfilled. Jung understood that life's most important transitions don't always arrive through careful planning. Sometimes they emerge through loss, separation, and walking away. Experiences that reveal desires and needs previously hidden from conscious awareness. Jung didn't see separation as merely diagnostic, but as transformative. Walking away changes not just our perspective, but our relationship to what we temporarily leave behind. This explains why sabbaticals, retreats, and periods of withdrawal often lead to profound reorientations in how people engage with work, relationships, and communities. Upon return, this transformative potential emerges because temporary separation changes both the person and their relationship to what they stepped away from. The executive who takes a 3-month sabbatical doesn't just gain perspective on their career. They become someone different in relation to that career. Their value system shifts, priorities rearrange, and they return with the capacity to engage differently. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly with his patients. Those who created intentional distance from habitual patterns often returned to similar external circumstances but engaged with them from a fundamentally different internal position. The transformation wasn't in the external situation, but in the relationship to it. This principle explains why traditional vacations often fail to provide lasting renewal. A one-week break provides insufficient separation for unconscious processes to reveal deeper truths or transform relationships to work. The person returns physically rested, but psychologically unchanged in relationship to their circumstances. True transformation requires sufficient separation for the unconscious to complete its work. Jung noted that this process follows natural rhythms that can't be artificially accelerated. The revelations and shifts that might emerge after 3 months of separation simply aren't available after 3 days, regardless of the intensity of reflection during that brief period. This timing element explains why sabbatical practices exist across cultures and religious traditions, from academic sabbaticals to religious retreats. These practices recognize that psychological transformation requires extended separation to activate unconscious processes that reveal and reorganize priorities. The return with new eyes represents integration between conscious and unconscious that Jung saw as the goal of psychological development. The person hasn't abandoned their previous life but engages with it from a position of greater wholeness, with conscious choices more aligned with unconscious needs. The current obsession with mindfulness and presence sometimes obscures a crucial psychological reality. We often discover what truly matters most clearly in absence, not in presence. Jung recognized this paradox decades before it would be confirmed by research on counterfactual thinking and the psychology of loss. When we're immersed in something, a relationship, a job, a community, our perception is shaped by habitual patterns of engagement. We see what we've trained ourselves to see, feel what we've conditioned ourselves to feel. Separation disrupts these patterns, creating space for actual rather than habitual responses to emerge. This disruption explains why major life transitions, career changes, divorces, geographic relocations, often trigger cascading reassessments of values. The person who leaves a high-status career suddenly questions the importance of status itself. The individual who ends a long-term relationship reevaluates what they truly seek in connection. These aren't incidental side effects of change, but revelations of actual values previously obscured by habituation. Jung would see in these moments the opportunity for what he called individuation, the process of psychological differentiation that reveals the individual self in all its uniqueness. Walking away temporarily suspends the social identifications and expectations that inhibit this process, creating space for the authentic self to emerge more clearly. What makes this perspective so valuable in contemporary life is its counterbalance to achievement culture. We're bombarded with messages about what we should want and value: status, wealth, influence, youth, beauty. These external valuations create a kind of psychological static that drowns out the quieter signals of authentic desire. Walking away, even temporarily, reduces this static. The person on a meditation retreat isn't just developing mindfulness, but creating conditions where authentic values can emerge from beneath social conditioning. The individual who steps away from career advancement temporarily isn't just reducing stress, but creating space to recognize what genuinely matters beyond achievement metrics. Jung observed that people rarely discover their authentic values through external acquisition. You don't find what truly matters by gaining more money, more recognition, more possessions. You discover it by creating space through temporary release of attachments. What remains important in absence has passed a more rigorous test than what seems important in presence. This insight transforms how we make major life decisions. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" a question often answered through socialized desires, we might ask, "What remains important when everything else falls away?" This question taps into unconscious knowledge about our authentic values in ways that conventional decision-making processes cannot. The most profound life transitions often begin not with finding something new, but with walking away from what no longer resonates with our deepest sense of meaning. In that temporary emptiness, we discover what Jung might call our personal myth, the authentic pattern of meaning that reflects our unique psychological composition. Are you ready to discover what matters to you? Are you willing to create the separation necessary for authentic values to emerge? Or will you continue accumulating external markers of success without ever knowing if they reflect what truly holds meaning in the depths of your unconscious mind? The path to psychological freedom begins with a single step away, not as permanent escape, but as temporary experiment. What would emerge if you created distance from what currently occupies your attention? What would reveal itself as genuinely important rather than merely habitual? Jung recognized that few people ever discover the answer because few are willing to create the separation necessary for authentic values to emerge from beneath social conditioning. Those who do often find that what truly matters bears little resemblance to what they've been taught to pursue. And in that discovery lies the beginning of a life aligned not with external expectations, but with the authentic self. But we'll save that for another time. For now, remember that Jung's most profound insight might be this: sometimes you have to walk away to discover what you truly feel.